So before we begin this panel, and I bring up our panelists and special guest facilitator, before we hear what community ownership means and looks like to community leaders across our 4 Spark sites that are going to be showcased today, we want to hear what it means to you. So on the next slide, you're going to see a QR code, and I want you to take out your phones. This is the one time I'm encouraging you to take out your phone. You can either pull up a link and enter in that code, or you can just do the photo. 4 words, up to 4 words that come up for you when you think about community ownership. So put in 1 word at a time in each of those boxes. And let me know if you're having any technical difficulties, but I think this should work. All right, so we're going to do that. I'm going to bring to the stage our special guest facilitator as well as the 4 panelists. The facilitator is Barbie Jean Missick. Barbie is the Justice, Rights, and Equity reporter for the Gulf States Newsroom, a collaboration between NPR, WWNO in New Orleans, WBHM in Birmingham, Alabama, and MBP Mississippi Public Broadcasting in Jackson. She is also an Ida B. Wells Fellow with Type Investigations at Type Media Center. Bobby's done all kinds of other amazing, impactful work. You can read more about it in the bios that you all have in your programs, as well as the bios for the rest of the panels that are coming up as well. Feel free to all come up. So Nick, maybe we can flash to the screen and see what we got. What kind of results? So what's resonating? Okay, power, equity, legacy, peace, generational wealth, strength, self-sufficiency, collectivism. But I'm seeing power, wealth, legacy, security, and equity right up in front and center. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Bobby Jean, and let's begin this panel. Thank you all.
Thanks, all. I hope that it's also a round of applause for yourselves. Let's introduce the panel. To my left is Lyric Kelker, Policy Director of Inclusive Action for the City, based in Los Angeles. And then we have Ian Winters, Executive Director of Northern California Land Trust. And over here, Jose Esparza, Executive Director of Buku West in Denver, Colorado. And Ojan Mobed Shahi, Financial Director of East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative in Oakland. Thanks, everybody. Just for folks to get a deeper understanding of your organizations, I'd love to just start with giving you an opportunity to speak more about your work and how it connects to community ownership. So let's start over here. Lyric, why don't you take it away and share that with folks?
Thanks, Bobby. Hey, everyone, Lyric with Inclusive Action. So Inclusive Action for the City is a community development financial institution based in Los Angeles.
Oh, and we're getting word that you should speak up a little bit, please.
Okay. Is this, oh. Okay. So yeah, we're a CDFI based in Los Angeles. We got CDFI certification a couple years ago. What makes us a little bit different than other smaller local CDFIs is that we also do a lot of policy advocacy. And we understand capital and capital acquisition as more than just monetary capital, but also physical, social, and political capital, and how it is that we as a CDFI and a policy institution would be able to bring that forward to the people of Los Angeles, and especially those who are most impacted. I personally work on policy issues, and so I have a counterpart who does all of our lending work, and we do small business lending for folks across LA County. We've deployed many millions of dollars, both in grants and loans over the last couple of years, and we currently, I think, have about 150 clients. So I'm excited to talk to you all today about community ownership because it's this really beautiful intersection of all these things, of the lending, the power of community, the policy that's required, and the financial products that are required to make sure that it all happens.
Thanks so much. And so we'll go across. So Ian, can you share also how the Northern California Land Trust kind of fits into this community ownership model?
Sure. So Ian Winters, Northern California Land Trust in Berkeley and a number of other small cities around the greater Bay Area. Our work, we are first and foremost a community land trust. And so our work fits into this community ownership model, really in the kind of down and dirty nuts and bolts of we buy homes and we help fix them up and we put them into residents' hands as owners through a variety of different models. So we use a limited equity condo model quite a bit and a limited equity housing cooperative, and also something called a resident controlled nonprofit or sort of resident managed rental. And then we also, over the years, have developed a pool of kind of resident-centered affordable rentals. So buildings that are maybe transitioning to full resident ownership, but in some cases, residents have said, we actually want you to just be an affordable landlord that does a decent job. So that's sort of the whole range of variety of community ownership types. We also have a small commercial portfolio and community garden. And we're in our 49th year.
Oh, wow. That's pretty exciting. Let's keep moving along. Jose, can you share Buku West's model for community ownership?
Maybe swap to just everybody just pass this. I'm sorry.
Is this easier?
Yeah, there's some ringing.
Jose Esparza, Buku West, out of Denver. Our organization started as a business association, and 10 years ago, I got there, and the previous director didn't speak Spanish in a neighborhood that was 81% Hispanic, 30% of the population were monolingual Spanish speakers, and the majority of the businesses continued to be monolingual Spanish speakers. And so it was easy for me to make a big difference. But I think, right now what we're looking at is, we've organized, we became a CDC, we're looking at community development in different ways, and we still are struggling to get our businesses into ownership positions. So, I think it's a challenge. It's something that we have to take on, and now we're starting to look at models that are doing that. We're fortunate enough to purchase a real estate-based business in our area that also generates income. So I think now that we look to the future, we're also looking at ways that we don't rely so much on philanthropic dollars only. We're also, I think, trying to generate that income ourselves as we work with our businesses to create a better situation for them.
Thanks, yeah. You can go ahead and pass that along. Ojan, same question. How does your work fit into a community ownership model?
Absolutely. Happy to be here, y'all. I'm Ojan with East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. We're a BIPOC-led and BIPOC-serving multi-stakeholder cooperative based in Oakland. We're relatively new. We launched publicly in 2018 after around 3 years of community meetings. And our work is to facilitate the acquisition and stewardship of property, taking it permanently off the speculative market with our BIPOC community members. Our model provides limited equity for those residents while creating collectively owned assets for the broader community that are owned together. So one of the differences in our model, and then like the typical co-op model or some of the land trust models that do provide for ownership, is that our members don't own property like on a one-off basis. They're actually co-owners in our overall corporate entity, if you will. And that corporate entity owns multiple properties, a whole portfolio across the Bay. And in that way, we're bringing community members who couldn't, typically even afford their own home to become co-owners in a corporate real estate entity that they can then participate in the governance of to really shape the future of their neighborhoods in all of the real estate projects that we do going into the future. We have 4 different types of membership where our staff owners, like myself, can become owners. Our community members, anyone living in the East Bay or rooted in the East Bay, can join for as little as $10 a year. And then they get to elect our board members, they get to participate in monthly governance meetings, and they can form working groups that will generate our future real estate acquisitions. We also sell shares, so people from across the country can buy a $1,000 share. And so far, we've raised over $3 million by selling shares. And that's equity. We didn't start with an endowment, so that's equity that the community can put into the co-op that we can then invest in properties. And then finally, our residents are also able to become co-owners and build that limited equity. And so, yeah, we're really rooted in collective ownership. I even prefer to use the word collective ownership than community ownership because, community is so multifaceted and everyone's part of a community. So our model, right, it's not about just allowing a community member to become an individual owner. It's around the community as a whole, through voluntary association based on our mission. People self-select in or out of our community, but the community as a whole being able to acquire and steward properties in a regenerative way that serves us for the long term.
Thank you. And you should hang on to that mic. My next question is just about. Oh, I'm sorry. That's okay, no problem. Yeah, so just speaking of that, of each community member sort of like buying in to be able to share ownership, I imagine that takes a fair amount of community buy-in. And so as you've recently launched, I guess, how did you go about generating that community buy-in, and just what, could you talk to us a little bit more about what that community buy-in looks like, please?
Absolutely. So our organization emerged because a grassroots organization called the People of Color Sustainable Housing Network, they emerged, I think, in 2012, and they turned into a Facebook group and a listserv just trying to help each other find affordable rentals. And after a couple of years, they decided, what if we were to form an LLC to own a property ourselves? So they went to this awesome law center in Oakland called the Sustainable Economies Law Center, and said, hey, can you help us form an LLC? And the law center said, hey, have you thought about creating a co-op? So that launched a series of 3 years of community meetings where they invited more and more folks to participate and generate ideas and refine what this co-op would look like. So when we launched for public membership in 2018, there had already been a lot of community input and vision into what would happen, what we wanted to create. And we also generate our projects from the community. So our first project, which I must say was done in partnership with IAN and the Northern California Land Trust, was a fourplex that one of our close community members and a resident of this property came to us and said, our property is going on the market. Can you help us buy it? And we were such a young organization. We're still a very young organization, but having no portfolio or properties to our name, we reached out to IAN, and IAN was willing to partner with us and lend their institutional credibility to EB Prec so that we could do our first project in partnership with them. Very similar to now that we have a couple properties under our belt, we have experience, we have a relationship with the city, we can lend our credibility to our community members, right, who are typically seen as too risky and not creditworthy. So by building our institutional momentum, we can lend that credit to our community members. And by really grounding and making sure our projects continue to emerge from the community as opposed to vice versa, we're really building social credit with the community as well as institutional credit with banks and lenders, right, to sort of bring those two things together.
Thanks. Can everybody hear me on this? It's on. Okay, that's all right. Maybe give it a try. That's all right. Well, I just wanted to follow up with that because as Ojan mentioned, their organization is young and was able to use Northern California Land Trust IAN to help boost it. And so I'm curious about, in its 49th year, what that community buy-in looks like for you.
So community buy-in looks, it involves many things. There is literal buy-in where, a lot of our properties, we acquire them the first time either through what are called bargain sales, so partial donations of the value or bequests, or seller carryback loans or private loans to help get the property through the initial acquisition until we can either raise funding from a city or the state or the county or individuals. So there's that kind of fiscal buy-in. We're not set up as a cooperative. We're a traditional 501c3, so there's not raising share money in the way that EB-Prec does, which we're all quite jealous of. But that does happen in our actual developments where they're also owned and in a sense collectively owned, where the cooperatives, though that entity is owned by residents, and the limited equity condos, there's a condo association, and each household owns their own unit and gets to build a little bit of wealth, but it's very different than an open market property. And then there's the social buy-in, which is just we're always having community meetings with residents and meetings with stakeholders and outreach activities. And we do on and off a community education program to sort of help learn the basics of how does this work and how does a land trust work. That's no different really than any other community organization, I would say.
Great, thanks so much. And Jose, I wanted to pivot to you. You talked a little bit about sort of finding I guess an entry point with Buku West, and then it was sort of easy for you to build something that hadn't been there before. But I'd like to just, I guess, learn more about like the step-by-step of creating sort of commercial opportunities that will create, ownership in the future, and how you went about doing that.
Yeah, I think for us, it started with the history of being a business association. I thought my job when I got there was I have to go support all these businesses on this corridor. I got to go meet everybody. So I was doing that, and I think ultimately that's what led us to at least think about what is each person's future. Like, what do they want to do? Is this person may be retiring soon. He may sell his property. What will that mean for this community? Is like we're getting more and more, doing more and more in terms of organizing the community and trying to see. I mean, there's plenty of challenges to overcome. We were organizing. We were looking for infrastructure improvements. I think the thing that our neighborhood had was 10 years ago, gentrification wasn't the issue, it was investment. We had no investment. So we organized for that, and we were able to get a $30 million rec center in the future and $20 million infrastructure improvements for streets in the future. Well, the future still hasn't come. It's 2027, I guess. But I think the benefit of that has been slower growth for us. And, I think we've played on every relationship we've had. We're trying to improve those relationships with the property owners, with the businesses, with the community, to see opportunities before anyone else sees them. Because we're in the community, it's not the broker who's passing out the pamphlet that gets the call, it's us. And so I think that's been critical to at least seeing the opportunities. And now it's just a matter of matching that with the funding, with the capital stack, and with, I think, the local businesses who want to kind of take the place of the next generation of the corridor.
And what are some examples of the businesses that are taking advantage of these opportunities that you have?
So our most recent project, and it was actually a baby of Spark, was we purchased a building with another large organization, a big land trust. It's a mixed-use property. We brought them the deal, and essentially pitched it as you take the residential component, we'll do the commercial, and we want to kind of minimize these units and sell them back to these businesses. And I've seen businesses go into this building, and they're putting all their savings in that. Like they're the ones making the improvement, not the landlord. So I think for us, like now we have an ice cream shop. We always wanted an ice cream shop in the corridor, and it's coming from the community. It's a little corner store, a bodega. Like I think those things maybe didn't make it in the market 10 years ago, but today they're going to make it. And if a landlord isn't supporting them, they're just going to try to crank up the rent. But I think for us, we'll have the opportunity to work with those businesses and then get them into an ownership position.
Awesome. I think that's great for me to transition to a question for you, Lyric. You mentioned that inclusive action for the city is focused on creating these commercial opportunities through microloans and through, taking advantage, I guess, of different policy or helping to draft policy. And so I am just curious about how you see those opportunities differing from residential, cooperatives and or residential community ownership models, and what are the policy initiatives that you're able to take advantage of because you're in this other space?
Yeah, that's a great question. So inclusive action, we do focus on small business work. And so we are part of a group, I didn't mention this earlier, we're part of a group called CORE, Community Owned Real Estate. And this is in partnership with two other organizations, East LA Community Corporation and Little Tokyo Service Center. We bought 5 buildings under CORE LLC, which the 3 of our organizations are stakeholders in. And the purpose of it was to take commercial buildings in gentrifying areas off the speculative market to then build some sort of mechanism to create ownership opportunities for these small businesses. One of the things that's different with small businesses as it is from residential is that the financing mechanisms are a little bit different. So small businesses have access to different types of capital than a resident would. When you're talking about whether, it be your own house or a housing cooperative or anything like that, it does look different for a small business. And that is really where inclusive action comes in. So the reason that we did this partnership is because each of our organizations has a different expertise. Inclusive Action does the small business lending and does a lot of support for small businesses. East LA Community Corporation, they have done management of affordable housing in many other buildings across LA. And Little Tokyo Service Center has done both commercial and affordable housing management, and they are really our compliance. So as the small business group, we see opportunities in figuring out a flexible way to finance small businesses to be able to become owners in this space in a way that makes sense for them, in a way that meets them where they're at, right? So a lot of the folks that we work with are like street vendors. These are people who are very low income, make between $15,000 and $20,000 a year. They're just like amazing entrepreneurs who work endless hours, they make their own schedules, and they are culture bearers in our community, right? So how is it that we're creating systems and wealth generation opportunities that fit the needs of street vendors and their families? And so that, to me, the opportunity is around what are the financing products, and then the policy that's associated with that, to talk about when we were talking about yesterday how equity is, it costs a lot of money. Listen, we need to be investing in these communities. We need to be making sure that they have the things that they need, and we need to be unapologetic about it. And so that's what we're here for, is to help push on the policy front to be unapologetic about investing in these types of small businesses who are the culture bearers in our neighborhoods and in our corridors, and make sure that they have a right to stay in these gentrifying neighborhoods.
No? Well, I'm going to hand it back to you, but I just wanted you to talk a little bit then about the policy that you worked on that is going to benefit street vendors directly. If you could tell everybody about that.
So we're really excited. A couple weeks ago, shout out to my friends in the corner. They're all part of the coalition who helped the California Street Vendor Campaign pass a state legislation that makes it possible for them to get their health permits. That sounds like pretty easy at the, like, oh yeah, just go get your health permit. But it's actually a very long laundry list of requirements, and it takes anywhere from 4 to 6 months. And we updated California law to ensure that folks actually do have access to those health permits in a way that makes sense to them. And through that, we're also exploring ways for LA County to invest in micro entrepreneurs like street vendors to give them access to the infrastructure that's required. So that includes carts, that includes commissary spaces or shared kitchen spaces, which is another thing that we're interested in, is like, how is it that you build out shared kitchen spaces in a way that invests wealth in communities? And so our friends, the last 9 months, we've been up and down from Sacramento, Northern California, Southern California to pass SB 972. Shout out to Lena Gonzalez. She's not watching, but in case she does, she was our author and champion. But we're very excited about that, and we're excited about the opportunities that opens up for not only street vendors, but also the other brick and mortar components that'll help out. So we're including like alternative styles of commissaries. So how is it that brick and mortar restaurants are able to rent out their commercial kitchens to support street vendors? How is it that churches, schools, libraries, community centers are using their space to help with the storage or the cooking of food or whatever, because they actually usually have that type of infrastructure. So it's a way to think about policy broadly. Last thing I'll say, I'm really excited about it. For that particular policy, and I think something that I personally have learned a lot from in the last 9 months, is we actually had a panel of vendor experts who vetted every single component of the policy as it was changed. I actually got a call this morning saying like, hey, are we having our panel this morning? We're not. But every time there was a change to the law, we had a panel of vendors go through it, and we explained to them like, hey, this is what we're understanding it to mean. This is how we think it's going to impact you. What do you think? And they would say yes or no. They'd talk about it. They'd come to a conclusion. And that's what it is that we actually advocated for up in Sacramento. And so that's the reason that we're able to like pull in all of these other components to build out a network of support that supports multiple types of small businesses, not just street vendors. And in a way that's less burdensome than often these types of policies can be.
Thank you, Ian. I want to say, sorry, I think I mispronounced your name once, and I apologize. But this next question is for you. Just coming from sort of a more long-standing community ownership project, this is kind of, I guess, more of a theoretical question, but I think that you have, I guess, enough experience to talk about how an organization like Northern California Land Trust really grounds community and allows folks to kind of thrive, stay put and thrive. And so I'd love for you to elaborate on that a little bit.
So, yeah, I guess a couple of thoughts. One is it's just always sort of a huge honor watching projects develop over an extended period of time. There are now projects that when I first served as a volunteer on the project committee, where I met people as young families that were, just getting together and trying to buy their first house. And, now I've gotten invitations to kids' weddings. And those are those moments where you're like, oh, this is what we're doing. Like, we're building a community. Like, we're making it so that a low income family in Berkeley can buy a house in 2004, and they're still there in 2022, when the amount of displacement that happens is so profound. So that, above all, is probably the biggest grounding thing. Of it really does transform local communities, local community associations, relationships with neighbors, relationships amongst the broader community, that there's a history. And sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's profound, but it's building this extended community is the biggest thing. And then there's the the kind of how it happens, which is also, I think, a really eventually learned that even though it's invisible sometimes, that our policy work is essentially a critical piece of project development. Like we sort of think of ourselves as, oh, we're project people that go and, you know, we sort out why the sewer line's not working and try to get a cheaper plumber and like do those kind of real estate things. But actually it's all made possible by some of the changes that have been really broad coalitions across the state that have developed of other CLTs that have led to sort of incremental bits of legal changes and advances. Like we collectively got a bill called SB 1079 passed last couple years ago that lets CLTs intervene in foreclosures and buy a home to keep people in their home. And then we got $500 million passed to be able to actually go out, because that SB 1079 law, you need to come with cash. And you have 10 days to come up with $500,000 in cash to give it to, you know, in an auction situation. So yeah, things like that help really transform that. And the last thing I would say is on the building community side, there's the relationship with residents and helping, even though we never feel like we can do enough. We did a study last year and 66% of our residents said that they were more economically stable after moving into a CLT home than before. And almost 70% say that they're, you know, somewhere between reasonably to very economically stable after they've moved. And that feels like a profound number.
Yeah, that's really incredible. I guess I have a follow-up to that for you or Ojan or both, which is just, you know, I think it's already like profoundly obvious, like how it's different from traditional low-income housing models. But what are, I guess, the benefits you see, you know, in these families that you work with, I guess, like how are they benefiting more than they would in a traditional low-income housing situation, I guess? And I'll hand it to you, but then I don't know if you want to.
I mean, I think one of the biggest things is, you know, myself and all the rest of our staff, we all know that residents are our boss. You know, a third of our board are residents, and people know that if they don't like something, they can turn up at a board meeting. And it's like the British Prime Minister's questions. I've been asked some hot, I've been in the hot seat more than once for, you know, something not happening. So that real true sense of ownership and empowerment and knowledge, like that is something that is really different. And this tradition of trying to do a better job. I mean, we don't always manage to do a better job, but we really do try, and to involve people in decision making and knowing that they're part of the governance structure. Like that's really different.
Thank you. Ojan, do you want to add anything?
Sure. And I think, does this mic work now? Yeah. Great. Thank you. Okay, so two answers. The first one's kind of conceptual. You know, as a cooperative, we're working a little bit outside of the charity model, right? Where we have, you have the for-profit model, individuals working for themselves. You have the charity model where like someone is giving to somebody else. The cooperative structure is fundamentally a self-help model, right? A really great model for self-determination where like in a nonprofit, you're actually not allowed to work to benefit yourself. Like you have to be benefiting somebody else. So by becoming a member in EB-PREC, our members are actually allowed to, and we organize to benefit the members of the community who are a part of it. It's not like a us and them charity situation. So in that sort of conceptual framework, our members can really engage to support one another and themselves, and we all support, you know, collectively. Practically speaking, the residents in our model like are guaranteed the opportunity to build limited equity. And one of the ways that they do that is with surplus. And in co-op, surplus basically means profit. So if you're a resident in one of EB-PREC's properties, we track how much you're paying every month, and we also track how much it actually costs to maintain that property. If you're paying in a given year more than it costs to maintain the property, there's a surplus generated there. Typically that goes to your landlord, or even in a nonprofit model, right? That goes into the nonprofit that they can then take and invest in their next property, your traditional like low-income housing model, which isn't the worst, right? It's better than some, rich white guy getting that in his pocket. But in our model, that surplus actually gets refunded back to the residents, because those residents are the ones who are working a job to pay that monthly contribution. So if there's a surplus, it just goes back to them because they're the ones who generated it.
Thanks so much. I wanted to open it up to some questions for everybody. So I don't know, since we just have one mic, I'll just try and look around a little bit. Well, I'm just curious about, all of y'all are from the West, Denver, and then California. And so in touring New Orleans and seeing the community here and projects that are sort of underway, I'm just wondering if there are, things in your models that would translate to what folks are doing or what people can do. And specifically, if there's, advice on laws to look into or policies to explore, or funding opportunities to explore as well. So if anybody wants to jump in and offer some insight, I'd be grateful.
I could share. I forget what her name was. The executive director of this space shared yesterday that they're doing an investment model, and I don't know. I'm curious what that model is. We use what's called Regulation A crowdfunding, and it's a securities exemption that you have to file with the SEC in order to sell shares in the way that we do. So if anybody's interested in that, I'd be happy to talk more, but won't bore you with any details. But I don't know if they're using the same thing with the O'Shea Center or something different. It's really exciting. Like, we're doing a smaller commercial project, and I think having a commercial project in addition to residential projects really gives you the opportunity to activate community, because once you have residents in your commercial project, you can't really gather there anymore, right? It's their home. So having a commercial space to gather and organize with community feels super important.
Thank you. You've got a question? That's okay.
Yeah.
We are going to open it up to audience participation in like two questions from now. Okay, and you're first. Thanks. I just have a couple more, which are, and anyone can answer this as well, but I'm just curious how you document your work and what the importance is of keeping that documentation. I don't know if anyone has an answer for that.
So the very honest answer is in a mediocre way. Like, we document in a mediocre way. There are times when we're actually so Inclusive Action is actually right now figuring out how to document exact systems. Like, how is it that I, Lyric, can take a vacation and pass it off, right? So like, that's what sustainability. So what does sustainability look like in these systems? And key thing that we're working on. However, we also do a lot of research, and I want to shout out my colleague Prince. He's sitting right over there. He has done a ton of research around different types of financing models, different ways that we could look into how is it you invest in small businesses, again, in an unapologetic way. What are new ways or new things that aren't happening? And those are other ways that we institutionalize or document a lot of our progress through these reports that we put out. And we have Inclusive Action is really big on blogs. We do blogs. And so just showcasing and crowdsourcing some of our information, because we're not the first people to do it, and we're not going to be the last. And so how is it that we can help build the knowledge base for folks in a way that works for everybody? Also, actually, something that we've been talking to the Denver table about, of how it is that we can collectively, like, basically create some sort of database with a lot of this information, because I can learn so much from any one of your sites. And I think that there are ways to repurpose it in a way that makes sense for Los Angeles. And I can also
probably teach some things that we've learned about, you know, the terrible habits of LA that y'all are hearing about in the news right now. So yeah, I would. So the short answer is mediocre, and then in the longer answers, we're trying, and I think we're getting better.
Anybody else want to answer that question?
I'd add to it because it reminds me of what we talked about in preparation for this. I mean, we make this up as we go in a lot of ways. So, you know, we're trying, I think, to find ways that we can share so that way our partners and others in communities around the country can do the work when we have success. I think, you know, one thing that came from a conversation here during the convention or the convening was like a guide. Like we can start to document these projects and say, this is what we did. This is we put these businesses on course to ownership in 3 years, and these were the rules or whatever that is. But I think that all of that is helpful. We run a kitchen network, like a kitchen commissary. And I'm like, there's so much we've learned, but I think need to have some form of like a way to share it and what information is important and what's valuable.
Thank you. Ryan, did you want to add?
Yeah, and just riffing off of that, I would say we're also like Lyric that our documentation is in most cases honestly mediocre. But one of the really one of the really cool things is between us and other CLTs, if there's been a good project idea or a bad project idea, we've probably tried some permutation of those two things collectively. And so we've been working on putting together a statewide library of kind of project documents, and also working, you know, for example, in our current Spark work in Vallejo, we're trying to see if we can raise enough TA funding so that what we come out of it, which is some really heady technical work around subdivision of ADUs and some really are fairly arcane planning materials, that we can come out of it with a well-written, concise sort of, here's how this works, here's how we've shown we can do it, and here's a set of model documents that you can go and do without spending a year and a half trying to reinvent the wheel, the square, and the lumber mill.
Thanks so much. Sure, Oshan, go
Real
ahead.
quick, one other way that we've tried to document as we're going along is last summer when we were trying to acquire Esther's Orbit Room, we did a live Instagram every week while we were in a campaign and in our due diligence. So we shared like, these are the reports that we got this week. Like, what did they say? Why did we do this? What is the escrow process? So just, you know, it wasn't something you could go back and read step-by-step process, but it was more just sharing live what we were going through. And as we do that with multiple projects, people can tune in and like get a sense of the art of real estate development as opposed to having to turn it into a science, right?
Thanks. So this is the last question. I'm going to combine two, and I'd love for everyone to participate, but you don't have to. But I'm just curious what your biggest challenges have been in doing this work, and also the part of the work that sparks the most joy. So one or both of those.
So I think my answer to both is the same. What are both the challenges and what sparks joy? There's two major things. The first is what, Jose, you said, we're making this up. So we get to make up whatever it is that we want to create, what works for our communities, especially because all of us do place-based work. So what does making it up for Los Angeles look like versus Northern California versus Denver versus Atlanta, et cetera? And then the second part that I think is both, it sparks a lot of joy in me, but is also a major challenge, is the fact that this is so heavily based on everybody. So like in my chatting, you know, I've shouted out a bunch of groups because like the only reason I have the information I have is because of all these people that I've been working with for such a long time, right? And so that is so powerful and also sometimes so hard because Like sometimes you just want to make a decision, but that's not necessarily what's best for the group. And so how is it that you're relieving tension and making sure that everybody is getting the things that they need, and we're being honorable to both the residents that are our bosses and the community members that are our bosses, as well as the needs of different organizations and how it is that like Inclusive Action has fiscal responsibility to banks, like let's be honest. So how is it that we make sure we're pairing that with what it is that the residents and community members we need, while also making sure that we're honoring our coalition partners? And that is very much a challenge, but also like, dang, I love the people I work with, like they're just the best. And so that's what I'd say.
In terms of challenge, I mean, probably the biggest perennial challenge has always been, and I have a hard time seeing a world where it isn't, is just capital. And we're perpetually just barely always trying to do half the project we're supposed to be doing, and with a quarter of the amount of money. And the related challenge to that is then so much of that capital comes out of the banking sector, and having to be the bridge between a banking sector that we're all here because of how much we disagree with, and our residents, and the actual project. And that's personally exhausting sometimes. But on the inspirational side, sort of being able to be part of really transforming small communities on a nuts and bolts level, that's really cool. And it's also amazing, like Lyric, I can't even list the number of crazy things that I've had to become an overnight expert in, that I didn't even know, like I didn't know what that word was, let alone that there was a field, let alone that I needed to like articulate answers to whatever it is in 4 days. So that's pretty fun.
Is that mic still working? Because I can, if we can go down the line, I'd love to hear your challenges and what sparks joy for you.
I think, I mean, in Westwood, there's so many people who are undocumented that I know that I just like, there's something beyond me that I can't figure out, right? Like I need to figure out how I can help a family that is afraid to work or afraid to ask for benefits or whatever that is. But I think, that without a doubt is the challenge that that I see that we're facing. And I mean, it scares people out of asking for help, but it also puts them into ownership positions as businesses. And, I think there's a huge opportunity there. It's just a matter of kind of organizing around it. I think there's a huge opportunity in terms of policy in our cities to have that discussion, that there are a lot of people who are undocumented and they're doing a lot for an economy. How can we help them? How can we make them a part of our community? And then I think what I love is the people. Like I love to be able to serve a community that my parents probably came into, and so I think it's a form of connecting generations, and hopefully we're doing something better for the next one.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, really resonating with what all of y'all shared. Another one that really has come up for us is conflict. It's being a really big challenge when you're trying to do this deep, cooperative, democratic, participatory processes. Like, especially around housing, people have a lot of trauma. People have a lot of pain and history around housing insecurity. And we definitely underestimated that and are learning to create more spaces for that to be held, to bring on trauma-informed support, because I'm not a therapist, right? So that's definitely, just to be honest, a real challenge in some of these processes, along with all the more tangible things that y'all shared. But the flip side of that is the healing that comes from being willing to participate in engaging with conflict as it comes up, I've seen it among staff members. I've seen it among residents that people come out the other side, with some healing. And it's really beautiful. It makes the work that I do not just financial, but like spiritual on some level, right? That we're showing up, making a commitment to my other staff members, my community members to try to be my best self every day and not just use a corporate hierarchy to be like, oh, you tell me what to do, I tell the next person what to do. We don't engage and negotiate those kinds of things. So.
Thanks so much. So we are going to open it up to community participation. And I'm going to start right over here. We've got a mic. I actually feel like that person. Oh, okay. Great. No, there's no problem. Anyone else would like to ask a question, feel free.
Yeah, I'm right here.
Oh, great.
So this question's around like patient capital, and I guess it's more directed towards you, Ian. Like, if I understand, you're acquiring like single family units in Oakland. So for context, like in LA, almost like every neighborhood is starting to have like the median price is like $1 million for like a single family house. So I'm curious if your like model right now, if you're starting to leverage like conventional loans too, like how are you going about the underwriting process and like trying to engage like banks to illustrate that like, hey, we are stable, we can acquire this property, but also if we're trying to like hit like that 50% AMI or 30%, that how do you go about convincing them like this model is like feasible? And just even like going forward, I'm not sure what's like in Oakland, but I assume like everything's appreciated up there as well. So yeah, I'm just curious about that.
Well, I would say the reality is we have, in the Inner Bay Area, over our history, we've done 2 standalone single-family homes, because the gap between an affordable house at $300,000 and the market price at $1.6 million, I'm good at raising money, and I don't know how to raise that. But the projects we do, the last 15 years, they've really centered on multifamily acquisition and rehab projects that really have an anti-displacement focus. So, to use a project example, with a project on 10th Street in Berkeley that we acquired during the pandemic, incredibly difficult transaction. And we got the seller to do a seller carryback for about almost half the price of the building. And then we got the city to put in 1.6 million that would pay off the seller carryback plus a limited amount of kind of life safety rehab. And then we got a bank loan that is basically calculated out down to the dollar to support the current rents on the building. And we've been going through the process of getting the seller carryback loan paid off and also trying to get people that are there housing vouchers so that the effective rent goes up and we can eventually, long term, it'll become a co-op. But right now we're in the figuring out how to stabilize it so that 8 households don't get evicted. So I don't know if it's quite the answer you want, but it's good. Yeah. And then on the single family side, we also use so when we've done condo projects and looking at, sort of single family ADU combinations in Solano County, we're drawing on Cal Home money, which is down payment assistance, which is incredibly useful for making limited equity homeownership deals actually work.
As well?
A lot of them are. If they're rentals, we often try to help people get on Section 8 or use a project-based voucher or Section 8 homeownership.
Thanks. Any more questions in the crowd? Oh, great.
Hi, this is primarily directed to Oshan. I was struck by the 3-year community engagement piece. We're about to do something very similar to revitalize our corridor in Chicago. And I'm just interested, what about the learning curve for residents around community ownership and this empowerment and shifting power? You know, we don't live in a city that, you know, there's a hand, on one hand, a number of cooperatives. It's never been about empowering citizens. And I don't even know if residents are even ready to, you know, take that mantle, and because we don't have any history, you know, about it. So I'm curious to find out, because I'm already thinking this is going to be a process. This is going to be a journey, but just interested to hear your experience along that 3-year, you know, journey.
Absolutely. So to be honest, I joined in 2017, the last year of the like pre-launch community meetings. And none of the people who were on the founding staff collective when we launched in 2018 were in the original inception in like 2015, 2016. So it really transformed and was I think I'm impressed by the practice of the facilitators who like convened that, the lawyers who really like held that space of releasing control of the structure to the founding staff collective. But to your question about like residents being ready for cooperative ownership, one way that we're trying to help them get ready is by allowing them to join as members of the co-op before they become residents, right? So you can become a community owner, you don't have anywhere to, you don't have a house in the co-op, but you can then generate your project through the co-op. So you're participating in cooperative things before you're a resident. But on the flip side, when we have an availability in a property, sometimes the resident who's selected has never lived in a co-op before and like hasn't been there, and you don't have 6 months to fill a place and train somebody up, right? Somebody joins and then they start with a training process, right? Where we do certain things over the first year at minimum. And honestly, our residents have been so stretched in capacity that we've brought it down from like monthly meetings to 6 meetings in the first year. So there's, it's reality that with housing, you can't always take the amount of time you might want. But trying to get people involved in the co-op and creating that culture before people become residents, it's like some sort of option to participate, I think is really helpful. Happy to talk more afterwards.
We've got a question all the way in the back.
Thank you. Let's see. I have a number of questions. I have to figure out which one to ask. So for CLTs, there's CLTs have been a promise for a long time, for decades, as the alternative, that what we need to sort of wrest back control of real estate and seize power for communities. I'm a huge fan of them. Every year they're a minority, of the development in the affordable housing sort of market in any given year. And I think part of the problem is just people's lack of understanding about why it's a good model. Renee and I just gave a talk about homeownership last week, and people came up to me afterwards and they're just like, but CLTs, it's not real homeownership and it's not real wealth building. And they have all this, I mean, you guys probably get hit with those questions all the time. And I'm tired of that debate, right? You guys probably you must be really tired after 4 years. So what's your, with all this practice of dealing with that line of questions, what's your quick, swift, like, this is why it's important and is valuable? And then I have one more question for Jose after that.
Well, so the first big CLT picture or question is, give us $50 billion a year like the LIHTC community, and then talk to us about scale.
Great.
Second one is on the wealth building question. It's really essential to look at who you're helping and what you're comparing it to. You're providing control and you're providing wealth building. And use an example of one of our homeowners. They came from a rental that they were living in with 2 little kids in a 1-bedroom. They bought a 2-bedroom CLT condo for $200,000 with 5% down. So $10,000 of their own money. And then we arranged all the other down payment assistance. During the pandemic, they moved back east to take care of family members. So they'd been there 10 years. When they left, they sold for $320,000 to a family at exactly the same AMI as they left. And they walked away with $120,000 profit plus about $45,000 for equity they'd paid down. So out of $10,000, they walked away with $165,000 over 10 years. Now, I wish that my IRA would do that. It hasn't.
Thanks. And what's your other question?
And sorry, yeah, just for Jose, I really wish you guys could sort of see the way that Westwood has sort of turned around what so many different programs that have come through Buca West, what that's done for the community, just visually as you're going down the street. But festivals and just the thriving of businesses. I feel like in our world, it often feels like a lot of our interventions are just slowing a fall. The community is going one direction, and it's who can build a parachute that makes us go to the bottom of the canyon slower. But there's some cases where it feels like we're actually going up, and businesses are there's more community wealth building, there's more thriving. What do you think over the next 5 years is the biggest threat to that? And what do you need in Westwood in particular? And what do you need to thwart that?
Thanks, John. Appreciate the compliment. I'm sure it has nothing to do with the old fashioned that I owe you. Yeah, I mean, I think, without a doubt, it's one of the things that I mentioned earlier was the businesses still aren't in positions of ownership. They're still not in a land bank or in a land trust. We have a lot of work to do, and we got to move pretty quick because there's millions of dollars coming. We've seen it for a long period of time. And, I also I go to work every day. I'm like, are we doing the right thing after, all these years that we brought so much investment and I think kind of turned the eye of the city as well towards that neighborhood. And I know that our population is heavy in automotive. The people who own these businesses are brown and they don't speak English and they've been there for 20 years. What do we do if all this construction pushes them out? And I think I don't have an easy solution yet. I think we're trying to dream that up right now, but I know that's the biggest risk right now.
Any more questions from the crowd?
I want to chime in on that one.
Yeah, please do.
The question of wealth building really provokes a lot in me. Even the limited equity model that we do and the example that you shared, Ian, is nothing compared to the average white household that owns their home outright and is going to be able to build all the equity in there, right? We know the wealth inequality problems in this country, and limited equity is providing a survival baseline. It's not changing wealth inequality whatsoever, right? I don't want to be disillusioned by that. And I do think that co-ownership in commercial activities is really important as well, right? When we talked about the Justice 40 initiative yesterday, we didn't really talk about where I haven't studied it, but I'm presuming most of those trillions of dollars are going to be spent on contracts with the construction companies who are actually building that infrastructure. And if we don't develop the capacity in our low-income BIPOC communities to own, not just be workers, but to own those construction companies, most of that money is also going to be going to the people who already have most of the money. So I think that's really ownership in our commercial spaces as well as real estate spaces is really important to create any kind of wealth generation, right, from this one-time trillions of dollars. Where is that going to go? It reminds me of the Community Reinvestment Act, where banks are lending in certain communities, but the people getting those loans are the developers who have the money and history of developing and then they're the ones benefiting, even though it's in the neighborhood of the, whatever you want to call the community, it's not actually being profited on by that community.
Sure.
Also, how are we learning to redefine wealth is the other thing. So like this is always about wealth building, and it's in terms of monetary components, but like I was talking about our street vendors earlier, they are a wealth of culture and knowledge, and Los Angeles is so rich with immigrants and immigrant stories from all over other parts of North America, South America, Africa, Asia. How is it that we're understanding wealth in a different way and what it means to preserve and build that wealth in the places that have been doing this for such a long time? And a note about New Orleans, they were talking about historic preservation in terms of people versus in terms of buildings. That's the kind of way that we should be redefining wealth. That's how we should be thinking about how it is that we're investing in communities and what that means, and the cultural return on investment that happens with these kinds of investments.
Yeah. The last thing I just want to add on to all of these ideas is to think about how much money those of us in the housing sector, our organizations spend. It's like that to me is one of the critical missing pieces of how do we help support and create businesses that are in our communities to capture and use all of those dollars that we spend on construction, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars.
Thank you so much. If there's no more questions, I think that we'll end this discussion, but thanks so much to everyone who participated, and thanks so much, panelists, for sharing your models for community ownership. I, as a journalist, have walked away with a lot of things to think about in how I can apply thinking about those things when I'm reporting on different co-ops in New Orleans. So I appreciate it very much. We good? Thanks, y'all.
All right, there we go. All right, we are headed to the home stretch. Y'all feeling good? Woo! Sandra, are you feeling good? Are you feeling great enough to come on down? Come on up. Could you please? I would really, really like it. It would make me ever so happy.